All right. So, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to another community sync update. As you can guys can tell, if you've been with us before, the majority of us, all of us, are working from home today because of Adobe Office moves. So that's why you're getting to see great video of babies, desk hammocks, and everything else. Um, so we have a few updates today. To get started, we'll talk about one of the major updates from this week, which was the move of our GitHub repository from Magento Research over to Magento. Um, and so we'll talk through that, why we kind of made those changes, and then any of the details, and Andy will present that. We have Mr. Zetlin, who's joining right now, who's going to walk through some of the latest PRs related to the Venya concept and library changes. And then we'll kind of open up for, of course, questions or demos from the community. And I think that's about it on the agenda. And we'll follow up after that and kind of wrap from there. So Andy, maybe you want to kick us off.
Sure. Let me share my screen here. All right. Can you guys see this? Can you see my screen?
Yep.
All right.
Hmm.
Cool. So yesterday, I guess, man, that was a week's worth of planning for one day move. But we moved the repo out of the Magento Research organization into the Magento organization. So basically, what that means is up here instead of Magento Research, we're now in Magento. And so the big reason we did that was to integrate with the community engineering team easier and better. And they've got a ton of tools in the Magento organization. And it's really driving towards trying to be more community focused. We're going to go over our process with the community engineering team, try to improve some things like basically inviting more people in and hopefully improve things for everybody. So um, another benefit of this, I guess, moving to Magento is we can get promoted a little bit easier. So I don't know if we're one of the pinned repositories in the Magento org right now, but if not, we will be soon. So just getting more eyeballs on the project, that kind of stuff. So that's kind of the why of it. Here's the issue that we were kind of working through. We did a whole bunch of stuff before the move. Yesterday, we actually did the move, and then we have a list of cleanup tasks and things to do now that the move has taken place. I did want to highlight we have a few known issues here that we're keeping track of. So our coverage report for our unit tests is not working right now. Now.sh and the CLA check are both. I think they're working, but they're not reporting their statuses correctly. So we have to figure that out. And then the other big one is that PWA Studio.io used to just redirect to GitHub Pages site that was published from the old repository, and so that is 404ing now that we've moved the repository. So pwastudio.io will point to the new docs site, but you may have to just wait for your cache to get busted or whatever to actually pick up that redirect. So if you have a saved bookmark or something like that to the doc site, you probably are going to need to update that because it'll 404 now. But it's a quick fix instead of Magento-research. Actually, I could probably go there right now. So pwastudio.io. So mine is still cached. So this is going to Magento Research, and the fix is really just to switch this to Magento, and then you're right back at the doc site. So probably need to update some bookmarks there, but we were hoping that we did some things ahead of time to try to get out in front of that, but didn't end up working. So just some manual steps for folks to do. I guess I would say keep reporting issues. We're monitoring the community Slack for any issues that folks are running into. All your GET traffic, your HTTPS, SSH fetches, pulls, pushes, all that stuff should be redirected automatically for you. But in the short term, in the long term, you probably do want to update your remote to point to the new location in the Magento organization. But Not something you have to do right now, although I might encourage it since we're talking about it and thinking about it. So, yeah, that's about it for the update on the move.
All right. Thanks, Andy. Any questions for Andy? Comments from the group?
Andy, you want to show them how to change their remote? I've seen people have trouble with this. I don't know if there's anyone on this call who would have trouble, but setting your
Uh,
remote, updating the remote URL for your remote is way better than what some people do, which is just reclone the entire repository.
yeah, actually, I dropped the some commands that you could run. Just the git command. It's just set URL, I think, in the chat yesterday. I can do that again today.
Fantastic.
Perfect. And right on cue, we have Mr. Zetlin. So there are no further questions for Andy. James, if you want to take it away on the Venya updates, feel
Hello
free.
there, folks. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Good, because you definitely don't want to see me. But I am going to do something fun that I've been trying to figure out for a long time. I'm going to try to share my screen. What do you think?
Go for it.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
No.
Not
No.
yet. No? Darn it. Yeah, I was trying to share my screen on mobile because that's what I'm on right now, but it looks like my phone is not cooperating with that. But I can tell you guys, if somebody wants to give me a hand, because I am still waiting for my computer to restart, then share the screen, go to pull requests, and I would appreciate that. And I'll tell you when I can take over. Sorry about this. Andy, would you mind?
Sorry, I was muted. I got you.
Okay, thank you, buddy. That's really, really hoping that this would work.
All
But
right, pull requests.
yeah, if you go over to pull requests, and then switch it to closed,
Okay.
then go to the V4 E1 that has been most recently closed. This is the beginning of the final chapter of the Create PWA CLI saga. So I wanted to share this first and say this is the the first step of 5 steps that are each publicly available for the community to inspect that demonstrate how we're going to move our repository structure and system to a much more modular future framework that enables both easy project creation and better extensibility. So the first step is really small and innocuous, which is a small refactor of the Venia code to stop using root relative imports. So that was necessary because pretty soon most of the Venia code is going to be library code, code that you would import from NPM. And when you import code from NPM, typically, when it's not application code, then that code needs to work independently. The code can't rely on a specific Webpack configuration. And we also do have expectations that the code makes, but it's a lot easier to import this code when it isn't expecting specifically to be running in the context of Venia. So this makes these modules capable of running in systems outside Venia that don't have root relative imports from source, because they're going to import sibling modules that aren't actually root relative to source, so these root relative imports wouldn't work. Fortunately, our team was really fast and merged this PR super, super quickly. And Andy, I'm probably going to be able to show off 3, but if you would like to go back and then go to open pull requests.
Number 3, you
And
said?
then, no, I was saying I only need you to share V2. I'm almost ready.
Oh,
I owe you one. Thank you, man.
okay. Problem. Wait for it. All right.
Okay. So once the root relative imports were merged, which they are, the next big step was to introduce a build pack API so that we can take all of the Venia specific Webpack configuration that's all over that Webpack config.js file and put it behind an abstraction so that we don't have to ask you guys to replicate and copy over and take over that whole file every time you make a new project. So if you look in here, probably the most relevant file to observe is webpackconfig.js itself. So if you want to go over to the files,
Doc config. Yeah.
yeah, that's the one, sorry.
There.
All right, so on the left, we have what the Venia Webpack config file used to be. Lots of very specific tweaks and changes to the Webpack system, lots of specific integration of build pack features. And so this constituted a tight and complicated coupling between the Venia code and the build pack code. So effectively, nothing would work unless you had your Webpack configured this specific way, and it took hundreds of lines to do so. So we have automated this and put it all into a simple function called configure Webpack. And function is still being documented, but in the text of the pull request itself, there's an explanation as to what it does. Now, over on the right, you can see that now that we have a configure Webpack function that we can import from build pack, then we generate a Webpack config with one call to configure Webpack. That call's asynchronous because it may need to do a little bit of file system work. But since you can use async await, that should be no trouble for you. You can see that the arguments to this function are in the sort of configuration object style, so they're easier to read than positional arguments. And what they do is let you pass the root context of your Webpack config, which is a little bit more reliable than passing the working directory. If we base everything on that root context in dir name, and that's on line 5 of the right side of the diff, then it's a lot easier to make sure that Webpack builds function reliably no matter what your working directory is. Really nice for things like running in a Docker container, etc. So that's the reason for that argument. The next argument is a list of libraries that we want Webpack to try and put into a synchronous vendor bundle. So these are libraries that would be used commonly across the system. This is actually a list that I welcome you to try and tweak and modify because it's probably going to affect your bundle size differently depending on the configuration of your code. So that's why we exposed this as a configuration point. Then below that, I suppose pretty far below that, here, let me actually switch contexts. Be right back.
Okay. Did it not scroll down?
Okay, can y'all hear me now?
Oh yeah.
Okay, let me go ahead and take over, Andy. Thank you for waiting. I'm going to share my screen.
Okay, sure.
Okay. Okay, can you guys see my screen instead?
Yes.
Okay. Now, so there's some documentation here in the pull request description, which is not good enough. Of course, that's going to have to end up in the documentation folder proper, but this pull request is only a few days old, so you can observe it and get a little sneak preview of it while it is developing into a place where it can be merged. So we looked at the vendor configuration, and whoops. Wow, that's not a fuzzy search. Used to be. I am not viewing the diff in unified style like Andy was. So let me do that. Okay, where was we? And then down here, placeholder, you can see that there's a new argument called special. Probably going to have to work on that name, but the idea is that this is an object that refers to the configuration of modules that are in NPM that this project
special and treat specially in the Webpack build. So if we go and view this directory a little bit, where is this file? So this is a little preview of how it's going to work when there is a Venia library. Don't normally like to commit commented code, but you can see that in the Venia concept configuration, we specify that this library, Magento Paragon, is to be treated specially. And the way we treat it specially is we say that it uses ES modules, which normally Webpack will not assume a node module does, and that it uses CSS modules, which again, Webpack will not normally assume that a node module does. And so now that it imports those CSS modules properly, then they're going to stay independent of the rest of the modules. And so this then requires that those libraries, that underlying library, actually use it. And if you look in the way that BuildPack works, BuildPack looks for features like ES modules, CSS modules, and GraphQL queries, and it uses them to set up tests. So these tests, sorry, not unit tests, but tests for rule configurations. So when you specify that a package has CSS modules, then Webpack is going to include it in this loader processor, which means that it's going to combine it with the rest of the CSS modules and then the style loader. So this is just kind of a shorthand for configuring Webpack this way. You look at the draft documentation that's in the description, you can kind of see what the available flags are, though they're not all obviously used in this pull request. There's ES modules, as we discussed. Those are going to attempt to pull in ES modules, which allows Webpack to tree shake them. There's CSS modules, which we discussed. There's GraphQL queries, which means that they're going to be passed through the GraphQL loader, which precompiles the queries and then also can pull queries out of the file system. And then these are the interesting ones. Root components and upward will allow you to let Webpack scan a directory inside a module for root components and add them, merging them together with any root components that you've declared in your project. Upward is similar to that, where if you declare if you declare upward to be true for a dependency, then Webpack is going to look for an upward.yml file in that module dependencies root directory and do a merge. And if that's not clear what that does yet, it should be. So when we merge this is going to add the Webpack configuration function, but by itself, that's all it's going to do because we're keeping these pull requests as separate as possible. Once that Webpack configuration function is in there, then it becomes possible to move Venia components to a library. So this PR, number 3, looks terrifying. What is going on here? 1,000 changed files. I know, but guess what? Almost all of those file changes, once we've gotten past some of the big stuff, actually, I don't think this is diffing. I don't think this is diffing correctly. Is this based on the wrong? Yeah, you know what, I think it hasn't been updated. But here's most of the files. Is there renames? Files renamed without changes. So all that's happening is that these files are being copied from Venia concept to a new folder called Venia UI. Let me go ahead and stop sharing and then start sharing my full desktop so that I can kind of show you what this does inside your actual project. On multiple desktops are very convenient. Okay, you guys seeing my screen again?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So I am now checking out V3. And you might notice that apparently it's not showing up the right folder. Sorry about this. You might notice that now that we have an additional Venia UI folder, the Venia concept folder has gotten a little bit barren. There aren't many components in there. They're not root components. They're not templates. They're not GraphQL queries. Instead, inside the Venia concept folder, all the dependencies that we want to be adjustable, we do have them stored here in Venia's dev dependencies package. We're going to try and shrink that a bit. But you might notice, maybe most importantly, that we are depending on the Venia UI library. And that library is at version 1. This is the first library, which will ultimately constitute many other Venia libraries as we continue to refactor this out. And so where do we use Venia UI inside Venia concept? Well, we still have an index, and that index imports the app from Venia UI. It has a store that we declare locally so that someone who creates a project based on this can easily modify store behavior, but it's importing all of the pieces of the store from the Venia UI library. So now that the Venia concept folder is fairly small, what you've done is you've let us on the core team and the community folks maintaining the core team start maintaining more component code. Now, this doesn't merge or fall back in the same way that Magento Fallback Studio does, but you can still utilize your own code if you want to and start mixing in your own stuff using a compositional system wherein you would just, instead of importing app directly, you would copy app out of the Venia UI folder and put it in your own. So I guess if we're importing the app from components, I guess I would copy and paste this file into my own. And now we need to change a couple of dependencies because all of these now are based on Venia library. So you could make that a little faster by just replacing this. Well, that, no, we can make that look better. And then over here, looks like you would want and this here would be. Okay, so now we have our own app component. And then in our index file, which imports that app component, we would import the context provider from Magento Vanilla UI still, but we would import app from source components. Or no, sorry. Here in this folder, you can still do root relative imports because we got rid of root relative imports just so we could move most of the Vanilla stuff to Vanilla UI. We want to make root relative imports convenient and accessible and easy for you, but that's at the cost of the Vanilla UI stuff that we're maintaining, needing to do relative imports instead. Not a big deal, and since the folks on this call, your core maintainers, you need to know about it, but this ought to be invisible. So this is how you would do that. And now let's take a look at what changes. While this is building, I'm going to give you a little sneak preview of some stuff. So nope, please not this. Please no. I think that because Yarn is downloading files, it might be slow. Can you guys hear me still?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Thanks for waiting. While we're doing the Yarn install and the Yarn build, I wanted to show you was the next step. Once the Venia concept folder has been shrunk down to a small set of kind of top level files that take the Venia UI and then render it into the DOM, then that makes it possible to use the Venia concept folder as a reasonable basis for a template. Like right now, we kind of make you copy the entire folder into your own project in order to start work. But now that when Venia concept contained the entire implementation of a store, that felt like taking over too much code. Now that we've put all that store stuff into the UI library, you can copy and paste Venia concept into a new folder and change some things. But also, that seems kind of annoying to do still. So we are adding a concept, first previewed at Imagine, for creating a new project based on a template scaffold, the first one being Venia itself. So in this PR4, we now have a Webpack function and a CLI command for scaffolding a new project. And I'm going to show it to you. Is it live? Again, the diff is not working perfect. This is a lot smaller than it looks like it is. Oh, that is a wrong path. Should fix. You might also notice that we now have kind of a convention where almost all the code from modules is in the lib directory for library. This is a way of indicating that this code is used directly by NPM dependents. It doesn't need to get compiled into dist because we have the expectation that your Venia UI code and any code from modules you import will be compatible with your local Babel preset. So lib is where everything is instead of src if it's not in your actual consuming app itself. Anyway, oh no. Looks like we got some bug, probably from the app needing to import the container and from, yeah. Suppose I can just copy the entire directory and that would be a good place to start.
Don't press those buttons. You don't press those buttons.
Who pressed what buttons?
Oh, she actually pressed the unmute button. Wow. Sorry. My daughter came up to say hi.
Oh, hi.
Say hi.
Good job.
Why
Good. Your presence is a great relief to me. It means Andy wasn't making fun of me.
I didn't even think about that. No.
Okay. Now all I need to do is is. Take this and drop it in. If this doesn't work, no worries. We will come back to it. All right. That index file. We would copy over from app index in Venia UI. Nope, that's not the right one. Components app. And there we go. Now that ought to work a little bit better in our build, but I'm actually most interested in showing you the stats from the build output anyway. After a couple of seconds, this is going to show us a visualization of what's in our app code and what's in dependencies. Or that will happen. Wonder what that was. Okay. Well, how about I go ahead and get rid of our customization so that we can be sure that at least that's going to work. Whew. All right. You guys see this?
Yes.
All right.
Yep.
Our app code is only a tiny, tiny part right here of the whole library. This is all the code that you own. And the underlying modules are even smaller. So this is good for you. Everything is inside veniaui.lib, and the stuff that you own that isn't in veniaui.lib is very, very little. What might be most important to you is understanding how you would actually automatically generate a scaffold based on this. Overriding a component, something I'd like to show you right now. I think in the current state of the PR, it's not working, but I think we can still at least show off the scaffolding creation. So let's do that.
Hey, James, I have a quick question about the stats that we were just showing before we move on. So if I go to, does that mean that if my website A, is serving our stuff and website B is serving our stuff, that if a consumer hits website A, they would download all those vendor bundles, and then if they go to website B, they wouldn't have to download those again. Those would be cached. Is that right?
That is something we're aiming at eventually. That's a really, really good question. Right now, that's not something we can guarantee yet, but we really want to, right?
Okay.
Right now, you kind of have to balance between the being able to customize your bundles for your site's own progressive load and being able to CDN them so that it doesn't have to load for your individual site. I think as we work, we're going to figure out what the most common bundle combinations are, and we'll end up with some sort of modular configurations for Webpack, so you can choose to use a bunch of bundles that'll be served from our CDN. But I think that's a little bit in the future. It is, however, a really good performance enhancement. Definitely.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, but not yet. Anyway, now that we have version 4 with a scaffolding generator, if we do a quick install of that, won't be too much work. Scaffolding creation gives you a command line command to run. Now, this isn't the friendliest thing in the world, but it might remind you of some bin Magento stuff where, boy, this thing has to do a full build. We still need to do some vendoring so that goes faster. Okay, so now that PWA Studio is working that way properly, let's say I go to the sibling directory. Cool new problems. Publish scripts. Unexpected JSON in package JSON. So I think I might be in a bad rebased state. But I also don't know why. So, okay, all right. Why would it work? Huh, I super don't understand that. We had a create script that is part of Venia so that it kind of declares how it would be copied over. And it sure ain't working. Path. Concept. Okay. Maybe it needs to be built. All right, I'm only going to try this once. And then I will just consign this to the ash heap of demo history. Okay. We'll try this one more time. Okay. We don't know what's going on there. But fairly sure. Well, since I'm unable to demo this right now, I will at least tell you that the idea for it is that BuildPack has now a concept where when you create a project, which I will show off the code for that, that you pass it a template directory. And right now, the only one that is supported is Venia. But it looks in the BuildPack directory, the .buildpack directory, which is a new convention that we want to promote, or that we want at least to get some review and feedback on, where any folder that has a .buildpack directory in it, BuildPack will try to interpret as a template to generate a new project from. And the create.js file in here is where Venia concept in specific describes how it is to be copied. So in the case of Venia, for instance, when it gets copied over into a new directory, you're going to want to change its name because it's not Venia anymore. You might want to update some of the build scripts. And so this actually specifies that stuff. You have the ability to return a visitor and then name each file that you want to treat with certain custom behavior. In this case, we say if you're copying package JSON, do this instead. Read it out of this path and copy it in. And this is where we're getting some kind of bug, not really sure what it is. We'll go ahead and debug it later. But I do have
So James, just to be conscious of time here, we only have a few minutes left. So if we want to maybe wrap and make sure that if there's any questions out there, we can answer questions and then take it from
yeah,
there.
you got it. You got it. I have an existing example just in case things didn't work. So when you run the creator, it actually copies over some of Venia's package JSON, but not all. And then you have a brand new project, which depends on the Venia UI library. And it has a new name, and it has a new basic description, it has a new license, and it has some basic scripts to set up. And this is what the future holds instead of calling PWA Studio repository. So thanks for your patience. But the upshot of it is that we have some v4 pull requests that are evidently, oh look, all right. I don't know what that's about, but they're here. And they are named in order P2, P3, P4, and P5. And I am really excited to see you guys' thoughts on it and feedback. I'm sure they're going to get iterated on a lot more before we merge them. But that is going to represent kind of the next phase of extensibility and repository structure for our project. And that's all I got. Thank you for helping me be mindful of time. So questions?
One quick question, from like a gut level perspective, when do you think people would want to start building off of this?
When
As
it's
in
merged. Sorry, not yet. Yeah, we are going to release this as a major. Some of the changes are additive, so we would call them minor changes, but certainly moving most of the Venia components around represents a big change. And since you import based on file system paths, that's a big API change. So this is going to come out as v4.0.0. And, we have a better QA process than ever, though you wouldn't think it to see my demo. And so we can say with fairly high confidence that when 4.0.0 hits, that we are hoping that people will start using this stuff immediately.
Right on.
Wait, is that true? I thought we were about to release 4.0. Maybe we should talk about that versioning.
Yeah, sure. I mean, maybe it's 5.0.0. The point is that it's going to be a major version that's safe so that you don't accidentally intake these changes. But yeah, whether it's 4 point or 5 point is not the point.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, of course.
All right. So we are right at time. I have my co-working buddy here with me
Oh,
as we
hi
wrap
there.
up. So if there are no further questions, we'll go ahead and wrap up and end this call. Pause for questions. All right. Well, thanks
All right,
everyone
thank
for
you,
joining.
folks.
Onwards and upwards. The
Yay.
recording has ended.
Bye-bye.